morning and welcome to the 8th edition of the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit. My name's Alan Livesey. I'm the Lex Research Editor at the FT and I'll be your MC for today. I'll be guiding you, the audience is also here, but also elsewhere digitally. We're at the Hilton Bankside in London, and we should have a really stimulating day of discussion. So again, thank you for trudging through the rain. I'd also like to say thank you to all of our sponsors for helping make this year's event possible, and you'll see their names there and behind me. Before we commence, a couple of housekeeping notes. We've got a slight change to the program. We will, Minister Dan Jorgensen of Denmark, he will, we think he's either delayed or it may not happen, but we think he might be delayed today. So we're going to move the networking break up a little bit, and it'll be more like 10:35. So just be aware of that. So we'll have a slightly earlier networking break after the first two sessions. All right. So some more housekeeping notes. If you have not already, can I encourage you to all download our event app. It's called Brella. There is a QR code to download the apps on the tables around the venue and actually on your tag as well. You'll have also received an email from the FT Live team with information on how to do this. To connect to Brella, you may wish to use the event Wi-Fi. You can also find the joining details on the tables around you, and again, that's on your tag. We kindly ask you that you put your phones on silent during the event. Everyone was very good yesterday. We didn't have to do any reprimands, so let's hope for the same today. At the end of each panel, FT staff will be on hand with microphones to take questions from the audience. For our digital audience, please ask any questions via the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. And don't wait until the end of the session. You can do it all the way through, and your moderators will be able to integrate those questions during the discussion. If you're in the room and you don't fancy raising your hand, please feel free to submit your question through the Brella app. If you could, please share any tweets and photos with us on Twitter X using the hashtag FTEnergy. All sessions will be available on demand on our website from Monday and hosted there for 90 days. There are no planned fire alarms, so if a fire alarm goes off, please make your way to the nearest fire exit, which is clearly labeled, and you can see the two green signs there. Tight security is going to be in place throughout the summit, so please, could you make sure that you're wearing your tag at all times? So, they will check these regularly, so you can't get in without these. Okay, thank you for your cooperation, and once again, thank you for being here. We hope you've already listened to some insightful comment from yesterday, content, I should say, and we're very much looking forward to what's coming on our third and final day. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first session of the day. How are energy-intensive companies disrupting the sector by driving their own energy transition? So I'm pleased to welcome to the stage Peggy Hollinger, International Business Editor at the Financial Times, and her panelists, Sue Armstrong-Brown. She's Global Director for Environmental Standards and Thought Leadership at CDP. Norman Crowley, Founder and Chairman of Cool Planet. Harold Overholm, CEO and co-founder of Alight. Ahmed Wafi, Director of Business Development Process Automation at Schneider Electric. So Peggy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you to everyone here, my panelists, especially, and for you in the audience digitally and live. So I'm just going to kick straight off here, and I'm going to start with you, Sue. I want to just get some view from you of where we are. If the question is how companies, energy intensive or otherwise, are disrupting the sector by driving their own energy transition, what does that mean? Presumably it means more than just making promises.
Absolutely, and I think it's a story of leaders and laggards. And actually, you could frame this whole debate around companies investing in their own energy sources as a leadership debate, because this is really a case of water flowing downhill. There are obstacles to sourcing the renewable energy needed at the scale required, as we know. And companies who are really thinking about this and prepared to mobilise their capital to solve some of the barriers are finding this as one of the options. So, it's fascinating, actually, to see how we've sort of arrived at this point and how...
What is this point? What is this point? How are we doing? That, I suppose I phrased that badly. How are we doing? Where are we on companies, actually? I mean, you monitor all of this.
Yeah, so at the moment we're not seeing enough progression, broadly speaking, towards the low carbon transition, and we all know that very clearly. I've got a couple of interesting numbers to share if you're interested in them. So looking at the leaders, we've got the group, well, one good group to look at is the RE100 membership, which is 317 companies committing to moving to 100% renewable energy use by 2050, I think. A lot of growth in that is growing year on year, the membership, so that's an encouraging sign, high commitment levels in that group, high growth in Asia-Pacific region, 60% of the membership now, which is our biggest emission region, so that's very positive. Share of renewable energy in that group is almost at 50%, so that's been growing. That's very good, and PPAs, interestingly, are now over a quarter of the reported renewable electricity sourcing. So that's a little picture of some of the leaders trying to solve the problems and mobilise.
This is about what they're disclosing.
Yes. All of this is just, CDP is the reporting partner for the RE100 initiative. And we can look at the breakdown and where the companies are getting their renewable energy from. But then we look at the laggards. CDP works with the World Benchmarking Alliance to carry out benchmarks assessing sectors for their low carbon transitions, and we can see when we do that there are some sectors which are not investing, and obviously I think we're all probably aware that the oil and gas sector has particular challenges in this respect anyway, but also is disclosing at very low levels what their capital expenditure is in low carbon technologies, and of those that are disclosing, it's very low numbers, very low proportions that are being invested in decarbonisation, 18% last year. So that's the picture. It's very spread. We've got some active solution-finding behaviour and some behaviour that's still in the old world of pre-transition investment patterns.
So essentially, we know that companies, encouragingly, it's growing, their commitment to this transition, but we're a long way from it. So the title of this panel is, how are they disrupting the sector by driving their own energy transition? So let me come to you, Norman. I mean, you have a company that helps, you advise lots of companies on how to do this. Can you tell me the trends that you're seeing? Obviously, efficiency is one, but what trends are you seeing amongst your clients about how they're trying to drive their own transition?
Yeah, so to continue Sue's thing of leaders and laggards, we have one client who has the same carbon emissions as Holland, and they are on a 15-year plan to get to net zero, and they're investing close to $1 billion of their own money to do it, and they will make a very good return on that, kind of 25% return on their money. And they have a plan, they're SBTI, they've committed to it, they're working towards it. And that's not an easy path to walk. Like one of their leaders said to me, it's great, we know what we need to do, we have the money to do it, we know it's going to work, we now just need to figure out how to go from 3 decarb projects a year to 300 a year. So the scale of what they're expected to do is huge, and they have a small team, and it's just humans trying to do their best work. And then on the laggards, we have another client whose carbon emissions are bigger than France. And they're like, oh, I don't know, the analogy, like a worm on the hook. They're just wriggling, trying to get out of it in any possible way they can. And when you think about, they're trying to get out of making a 25% return on their money and completely streamline their business. But by God, they're trying to get out of it, you know? And so it's a human decision thing rather than it's not a lack of technology, it's not a lack of money, it's humans, right?
So, okay, that's the human obstacle, but those who are driving their own transition. How are they trying to do this? I mean, we've seen a growth in these dedicated power purchase agreements that, you know, I can soak up all of the generation of a particular plant, so essentially it's my plant, and that can come in different forms. Or are we seeing that basically they're trying to be more efficient? Can you give us sort of three or four ways that you're actually seeing accelerate?
Yeah, it's well, and Ahmed can comment on this as well, it's a well understood path, right? So if you take that client who has the same emissions as Holland, like there's 15%, so their target is a 70% reduction by 2032 in carbon, right? And so that looks like 15% they get for free because the grids in all of the countries they work in are greening, right? More renewables, more biogas, etc. So they don't have to pay for that one, it kind of comes for free. Then 30% drop by just making all their plants efficient, right? So back to, they built these plants and bought these plants and they were supposed to be X efficient. So now if they can achieve X, they will drop by 30%. And that's mainly what we do. And that's, the reason that's cool for them is because the payback on that's incredibly fast and the plants work better. So if you think so far, 15% for free, 30% everybody's better off, great return on their money, and then plants working better anyway. Nobody got hurt in the making of this movie so far. The next one then is PPA, and PPA is a very clear role there, right? Like you import, you do PPA agreements, and you get that, and you win, right? I'll come back to that in a split second. And then down at the bottom, there's like 15% that's TBD, right? And that's waiting for a bit of new tech to come on board, and also for just stuff they haven't figured it out, we haven't figured it out. So that's the last 15%. The reason the PPA appears there in that stack, right, is because you get the first bit for free, you get the next bit efficiency-wise. The reason you do the PPA next and not at the beginning is you need to figure out how much power you're going to consume, when you're going to consume it, and what price you're willing to pay. Like you mentioned when we were chatting earlier, like some scandal about like people who bought PPAs and then I don't know, there was a problem with the PPA. Most of that comes because you didn't know what you were buying, you didn't know how to buy it, when to buy it, and because you didn't have any data about your whole system. And then you bought a PPA and then you were like, oh God, I've got a whole lot of energy when I don't need it and I've paid too much for it. And then you were saying earlier, Matt, that's a maturity thing, right? So, yeah.
So I mean, exactly. I'd like to come to you, Ahmed, as well, because, you know, it's all very well to say that we want more companies to adopt renewable energy to reduce their emissions, but there is a problem with investment in the grid. You know, just because I go electric doesn't mean that I'm going renewable.
Yes. Well, actually, I'm very much aligned with what Norman has mentioned. And if you look at companies and probably, let's say, 4 maturity journeys. Looking at PPAs, I think PPA is not the only solution. Of course, at Schneider Electric, we are an advisor, probably one of the largest advisors for PPA, 14 gigawatt. However, does not what come in the first place. First of all, you need to know why you want to use this PPA for. So, and this comes in probably in a journey. First of all, you want to decarbonize, and you need to know you want to decarbonize for scope 1, 2, or also scope 3. And if you look at heavy industries, for example, where they probably have 80 to 90% of the energy that take place in the heavy industry is actually fossil fuel, that to heat furnaces, to boilers, etc. And if you want to do a PPA in this type of industry, that will be a very small part. However, you need to be committed. So the maturity journey that I would see here is that, first of all, you are committed to decarbonize. And you start to also look at solutions where you would want to electrify parts of your process. Then you would know how much electricity you would probably invest on-site, some renewables, some solar, geothermal, and then to cover the basic assets, non-process assets. And then you get to a next level of maturity when you know, I want to electrify motion, and then I want to electrify heat in my process, and then you would have a sizing of the amount of electricity that you would want to source. And then you have another maturity level where you have where you want to be able to have a distributed energy resource, where you not only have PPAs, you have PPAs, you have on-site renewables, you're also connecting offshore winds and have other solutions. And you find yourself with, I think we're not only thinking about one solution, but I think there's not one bullet, sort of I get PPA and I'm decarbonized. But I think what we need to also align on, that there will be a multitude of solutions, and it's all about not only adding more hardware, but how can we get more efficient in utilizing this hardware by investing in software that would be able to advise and recommend when I would be able to source the cheapest and the cleanest electricity. And those who are really best in class, that will be able to, they have all those assets. They can make this decision, informed decisions, and then they can be able to even be prosumers, and they can be able to sell, and they know when to sell, when the electricity is probably of a higher value to sell, and maybe frequency response, and be able to act as a prosumer. So I think it's not, to summarize, it's different maturity levels, and I think it's all about where you are in this maturity.
So I wonder, because one of the things in researching this panel, there was a recent report from, I think, the Resource Platform that said there had been a very sharp rise in PPAs in 2022. And interestingly, I was quite struck by this, professional services had the biggest increase. So lawyers and accountants are all striking PPAs. Traditionally it's been power purchase agreements. I should not use the acronym, sorry, bad journalist. But you have this sharp rise in it, and traditionally it's been the tech companies like the Microsofts, the Googles, the Amazons. Now I'm gonna come to you, Harold, just to say, You've heard a bit how it's part of the formula, it's part of the recipe, but you actually do build solar farms for companies, you do PPAs. Can you just tell me, is there too much demand? Do people think they're the silver bullet, that it's easy? I mean, where do you see that this should fit? And what, if I'm a company, when should I be considering this? And when should I be considering what you're offering?
You should consider what we're offering. Yeah, thanks. So PPAs, yeah, it's increasingly popular. I think that's a good thing. There can't be too much demand for it, because this is demand for power. I mean, every company uses power. It's just like tax and rent. Power is just a fact of life. You can't get away from it. And PPAs is power purchase agreements. This is one of many ways to get power. So everyone, logically, in a way, we sometimes feel, being in the market, that it's just a question of how many wants PPAs. It's just a question of how many understands that they exist. Like 5 years ago, people didn't understand PPAs, so didn't want PPAs.
But aren't they the same as offtakes? Sorry, I'm interrupting you, because this was something I found. It's just offtakes. We've had those for decades.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a simple agreement.
Are they different?
It's just, I think, historically, companies just didn't think about power. Like most companies in this world, unless you were a super top power user, like you mentioned, Microsoft. But there's millions of companies in this world that use power, and most of them never thought about power. They were just buying power from the utility, getting a standard agreement, maybe hedging a little bit, but like it was just not something that management thought of. And along comes something new. You can sign a PPA. You can get 30% of your power cheaper, hedged over a long term, like 10, 15 years. It's something new, and there's the whole carbon dimension to it. But I mean, this is a panel about carbon, so we kind of come from that angle. But actually, I think the main driving force behind PPAs is that people save money on them. So I've never met a client this far that has signed a PPA that it didn't think that it would make money on. So that's a commercial question. And more than just making money. I mean, in the last 2 years of turmoil with the Ukraine war, etc., it's not just making money, it's just locking in the price in a predictable way for power. You're very worried about price spikes, And most specifically, you're worried about what happens if there's a price spike and my competitor has a PPA, so they're buying power on a fixed price, but I'm not. So my lights go out, but they stay on. So that has actually nothing to do with carbon. But carbon then comes along when it's a renewable PPA. It's like this very nice added benefit energy that just helps companies to feel even stronger for it. So you have all these new things, meaning that today, management at a company would look at a PPA and find this is great, it fulfills, I'm worried about power, and I'm worried about volatility of power, and I'm worried about decarbonizing. And here comes this new agreement. 5 years ago, management didn't really have those issues, and they didn't think of it. So that's the big change in the market.
So they're new but not new. They've been around a long time, but new, people learning how to use them. Sue, go ahead.
This is such an interesting point that you're raising about the motivation for engaging in an agreement like that. And you asked about is it just an offtake? Is it really a genuine contribution? And I think this is a really key point. So if we're seeing the potential for private companies to become active partners in the renewable energy transition in terms of decarbonising the grid, then it needs to not just be offtakes. That's the crucial point. And I think we all know that not all renewable energy purchases are equal. So if companies can be motivated not just to buy renewable energy that's being generated, but to be investing in the new technology, because of course if they're buying old technology, renewable energy, there are various implications of that, including efficiency levels and so on. If they're investing in growing capacity for renewable energy generation using the newest technology, which is the most efficient, that's an active contribution to decarbonising the grid. So that is not just simply where's the profit for me in this. And that comes from companies taking the transition, the low carbon transition into their business strategies and adopting their own commitments that will drive that behaviour in a way that the profit motive doesn't completely do. And that comes from a real understanding of the opportunities and risks implicit there in the low carbon transition. And you asked right at the beginning about where are we? Well, we've got a long way to go here. We're seeing the data that CDP collects shows that in terms of companies making those targets, especially when we're talking about their value chain, so not just their own activities, but Scope 3 emissions, less than half of companies disclosing to CDP are reporting on their supply chain emissions. So I think we've got that's not great, but it shows the potential for growth in companies moving to more active participation in growing renewable energy delivery if more of them start making these commitments and asking their suppliers to do the same. We're seeing really low numbers disclosed there. Only 10% of the companies that have additional climate-related requirements in suppliers are asking for their suppliers to set renewable energy targets. That's wrong. 1%. 1% are asking suppliers to set renewable energy targets. Yeah, so that's really low. So that means there's loads of growth potential is the positive way to look at it. But currently we're starting from a low base, and we need to be really clear about what we're talking about when we talk about renewable energy purchasing.
So there's loads of questions I've got in there, but I actually wanted to go to Norman on this point about the supply chain, because you're presumably for your clients looking upstream and downstream.
Yeah.
And why is there this reluctance? I mean, especially with
it's a nightmare for them. Like if you look back to that, we were talking about PPAs there. Like 5 years ago, all they had to do was call up the utility, more electric, more gas. They got a bill, they paid the bill, goodbye. Now, like they have all these floating prices all over the place. They have a massive requirement to green the energy that they're getting. And then it's forcing them as companies as well. They have assets like generators and batteries. So now they're becoming prosumers, right? So they have to do all this complex trading internally. And thankfully there's kind of software and capability there. But it's a huge change because for 50 years they just called up the electric company and they got electric. And now they're becoming traders and that level of sophistication is required. And then getting your head around that and going from 3 to 300 decarb projects internally, and then you've got your suppliers, right? And to give you an idea of scale, we have a client in France and they have 1 million people in their supply chain, right? So, so talk about the threat and the opportunity. with CBAM and a four-letter
Carbon Border
acronym.
Adjustment Mechanism.
Well done. Yeah.
Just in case anyone didn't know.
So what CBAM is horrible for these people. It's brilliant for the planet, but horrible for the client or these industrials, because now you have to pay tax at the border on the steel that you bought in China. And not only that, the only way you can lower that tax bill is if you're clear about who the carbon intensity of the steel that came from China. But the Chinese have a rule, conveniently, that they're not allowed to share the data of the steel and the carbon intensity that went into it, because that's the law, apart from when it's not the law. Yeah. And so what we see, we have this French client, what they're doing is they have to urgently decarbonize their supply chain, because otherwise in 2025, in this particular example, 90% of their profits will be obliterated by CBAM, because it's steel, it's all the stuff coming in from other countries where the carbon intensity is not clear. So what they're doing, because what we hear from the US is they go, oh, well, we can't possibly do this. It's all so complicated, right? But actually what companies are doing is they're not going to all their suppliers, they're a million people. They're doing 80-20. So 80% of their carbon comes from, in this particular example, comes from 20 companies, of which 12 are in China, right? So all you have to do is go to those companies and say, I want to know the carbon intensity. I want to know what your plans are. I want to know you're going to do PPAs. So it's not this impossible, we couldn't possibly. And when I hear that, I think it's such horseshit, right? It's kind of trying to get out of something that's actually not that complicated. Go to the top 20 suppliers who are 80% of your carbon and just make them do the thing you did, right?
You have to know they're 80% of your carbon first.
Yeah, but actually in a spreadsheet, like people say we don't have the systems for that. In this particular client example, never mind all the fancy systems that we can sell them or Schneider can sell them, it took them, and they're brilliant and we need them, but like it took them 4 days in a spreadsheet to figure out that 80% of the carbon came from it. And then there was a dance with China, but we can't possibly, well, if you don't, by 2025, we're gonna have to make the steel in France. Oh, well, in that case, lo and behold, we can give you the data. And then let's talk about, we can put a top gas turbine on the steel plant and it'll reduce the carbon by 80%. So much of it goes back to just humans. It all comes back to humans. We have the technology, we have the money. Yes. It is just humans making a decision. And the thing, CDP play a brilliant role in this, we think, because they go, SBTI, you're going to commit. I don't want to commit. Well, either a customer is pushing you to commit, or Blackstone or whoever are pushing you to commit because they lent you the money and the price of that money is going to go up unless you comply. But we, as horrible as it is, if we have the technology and we have the money, we need a bigger stick, right? Because if I'm going to give you a 25% return on your money for decarbonizing and you're still not willing to do it, then clearly you need a bigger stick.
And CBAM, it sounds to me like CBAM's a pretty big stick.
CBAM's a scary bloody stick. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about the technology. Let's talk a bit about the technology, Ahmed, and kind of the technology you said, Norman, technology exists, we can do it. Does it really exist to take us to net zero? Is it literally just a question of reluctance on the company? What is the next level of technology that's coming down the road that companies need to be aware of that will help us get there, that maybe they have more control over rather than sitting there passively?
Well, if you look at the energy transition, let's take an example of hydrogen, for example, and the scale that need to take place to add on a number of electrolyzers to the industry. So probably from now to 2030, 200 times more to get there. The technology is there, but the challenge is scaling it up. And the challenge that we have, or probably my view, is that it's a scaling problem of technologies that most of it already exists. And I think we are bounded by two things. Companies that already exist, and they have a momentum of ways of working. So for example, a project, CapEx cycle, 6-8 years. That's because that's how we've done projects in the past. And also we have another challenge, which is, not challenge probably, but fact, which is new startups coming from science and want to get to, to industrialization, and they are not yet, they are on the maturity level of trying to get from science to engineering. So this is where we are from the two on the spectrum on how can we get to utilize the technology that already exists. I'll give you an example we at Schneider Electric, we're also a technology company. We have factories, we have 160 factories around the world, we have a supply chain to decarbonize, and we've taken sustainability as core, and I think the point that you're bringing earlier, I think you're talking about the stick, and I think there is also, in addition, whether sustainability is core to your business or not, or it's just a side project that is there. How we have learned it, that the energy transition would not come like binary from 0 to 1, but it's rather a continuous cycle from strategy, setting objectives, goals, digitizing. We didn't talk about digital. You talk about reading information, 80%, decarbonizing. We cannot improve something that you do not measure. And I think this is a key point that is probably not hindering, but slowing down the capability to scale up. That the digital technology are not yet leveraged to its
dreaded word AI. We should be able to do it.
AI has a place. Yeah.
AI is a place for optimization. So if you go again to a maturity of leveraging digital, there's those who are just probably in the beginning just measuring to make an alarm. Then you get to probably start to control. Then you start to leverage all this information to start to optimize, use AI. And then if you're really best in class, you start to benchmark, unified operating center, be able to compare the performance of your assets, compare the performance of assets and your peers. And based on all this information, you can, and that's what we've learned on our factories, you start to prioritize decarbonization projects. Which project need to come upfront, when, and think, and continue the cycle accordingly. So strategize, digitize so that you can measure your performance, and then decarbonize, and that gets in a cycle.
It strikes me, just listening to all of you talk, it strikes me that the simplest message for companies, and it's a bit like me when I'm either facing, a messy house or a really difficult article, take it step by step. Just don't panic, take it one step
Absolutely.
at a time.
But at least make the first step.
At least make the first step. So this all sounds great for big companies. We've talked a lot about, 20 suppliers, 80%, all this sort of thing, and I have leverage with my suppliers. But, not every company is a big company, and every company is facing this challenge. So, Norman, one of the things when I was reading up about, power purchasing agreements and Amazon can take an entire power station to itself, we are beginning to see the development of multi-company PPAs, I think. Yes. Now, I wonder, from your perspective, how much more of that we need to see? What do they offer? And is there, could you see one power station serving 5 companies? Is that where we need to go to?
Yeah, absolutely. So PPAs, especially in Europe, are becoming available for many, many more companies than previously, because it started with large-scale wind and only one off-taker per asset. And then, logically, because large-scale wind is really, really big, it was only like the aluminum producers or Microsoft that could use a PPA. Then PPAs moved into solar, where the assets are much smaller. So the typical park that we built in Sweden, like 12 megawatts, that's like 12 gigawatt hours per year. It's a very normal consumption pattern for any company. We created a PPA with a bank. They don't have an outsized power need. So solar, to start with, makes PPA available for many, many more. And then you have this idea that you can split it up and you can have 3 off-takers for the same, which is great, because again, you just make it available to many more. And just to pitch why PPAs are important for the energy transition and kind of the theme of this panel, like how do companies contribute to the energy transition? In many parts of Europe now, certainly where I come from, Sweden, we didn't have solar. Like we never had large-scale solar. We never had any government programs to do it like like the Germans did. We never had any contracts for difference with the government. So we just didn't have solar until we figured out that you could do PPAs and companies. So in this case, so the first big solar park in Sweden was Swedbank, one of the largest banks in the region, signed a PPA. So by signing a PPA and creating a long-term credible offtake, we could, in that case, we could build a park. Now many other developers are building in Sweden as well. Everyone is building with a PPA. So you have this direct link where at Swedbank headquarters, they're sitting around thinking, well, we're now happy with this PPA. It's a nice contract to sign. We don't know much about solar, but we know that we're going to make money of this, and it's a nice contract to sign. Let's sign it. And by just that simple decision, they are creating a new solar asset in a place that didn't have solar assets before. So I think that's great. I mean, that is just how the energy transition happens. The solar panels wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Swedbank. So we love to tell that story, and we love to help our customers tell that story to pitch the value of this whole thing for putting new power on the grid, new green power.
Norman, you looked like you were gasping to say something
well done.
there.
I was going to tell you all a funny AI story, actually.
Go on.
Because you all have to sit here for today at a conference. I'll join a couple of dots together. So we're saying, like, we have the technology, the money is there. On the outer thing, hydrogen, the technology is coming, but like most of the technology exists, and most of the technology existed years ago. And then we talk about AI, and when we look at it and we say, if we have the technology, we have the money, we have the legislation and the pressure, then why aren't people doing it, right? Isn't that ridiculous? And 70% of all carbon is either big factories, buildings, or transport, right? So simplified. The other big number is meat. So 70% is those three things. We can decarbonize those things by between 60 and 80%. Why isn't that just happening at the moment? Like, there's conversations about carbon storage and all this kind of stuff, and we're there going, or somebody said to me recently in the US, like, how do we get the last 15%? And I'm like, can we not do the other 85% first, right? And then we'll worry about the 15. But back to the funny AI story. So when we looked at this Gartner did a study, and this is crazy, right? In 2016, 75% of the people who work in corporations were willing to help deliver corporate programs, right? It makes you worry about the other, what were the other 25% doing, right? But hey, 75% will get the job done. They did the survey again in 2022, right? And 30% of people were willing to help, right? So is it the great resignation or not giving a shit, whatever it might be, right? So we're there going, oh God, how are we going to go from 3 to 300 projects in this corporation if nobody cares anymore, right? And then we were like, AI, right? And we read a report that ChatGPT could reply. You could ask it a question, how many people are at this conference today? And it would go 210 or whatever. But you can also say to ChatGPT, when you reply to me, reply with sarcasm. Reply to every single thing I ask you with sarcasm. Sounds like being in a relationship sometimes. Although not the one that I'm in.
Good save, good save.
So we said, okay, this number 30% and everyone else doesn't give a shit. Suppose we got all the machines, and the machines are just gray, right? So when I come home in the evening, I have my Instagram, and it's all color, and TikTok, and friends, and it's all delightful. And then I go into work, and it's like this gray screen that says, boiler 52 isn't happy today, right? And we're like, oh God, no wonder people don't care. And so we said, let's get AI to, instead of responding with sarcasm, to respond with compassion and appreciation, right? So we said, let's bundle all the boilers together and call it something. And then when you fix me, the boiler, I will respond with gratitude, right? Yeah. And we piloted this in a plant that's an utter monster. This thing is the size of a port in Spain. And instead of doing all the fancy change management and complicated things, and people don't want to do it in another corporate program, people just started to respond back. They were like, well, I better fix the boiler before I go home, because if I don't fix the boiler before I go home, it's going to be there all night in the dark.
Be unhappy.
Being unhappy, right? And so, could the answer, we're there and we talk about all this scale and complexity, which we have to deal with, but like, could it be as simple as just the machine saying thank you?
That's just fantastic. That's fantastic. Now, I don't know how to follow on from that, but what I'm going to say is we have just under 5 minutes. I want to know whether the audience, either here or virtually, have any questions. We haven't received any virtually yet. There's a box at the bottom left or right of your screen where you can pose a question. Does anyone in the audience, give a couple of minutes for questions, does anybody in the audience have any questions for our panel? No, that's good, because we can carry on and get the good stories.
We should have planted one.
We should have planted one. I'm sorry, that was an oversight. I wanted to come back to, one of the most out there kind of suggestions. We've seen a number of companies actually become owners of power stations, generators themselves. I think Johnson & Johnson, Amazon, I have some other notes here. Is that ultimately, to what extent are companies going to become generators, investing in and running their own power generations for their plants? And what impact might that have if you think about the grid in future and you think about supply and demand in future? A, do you think that's the correct premise for this, for the biggest companies? And what impact will this have on the market? I mean, Sue, you have a view on this?
Absolutely, although I don't know the right answer.
Okay, no one does.
But when CDP asks companies and investors to disclose around carbon and energy, we frame it as, what are your dependencies, risks, opportunities, and impacts? Obviously, when we're talking about energy, the impact's very clear. If it's renewable or non-renewable source, you're contributing or you're not contributing to global carbon decarbonization. That's the one.
Buzzword 4.
But so it's all framed like that in any case, and it's quite clear that obviously if there's a major risk associated with your energy supply, the more you can control that, the lower your risk is. So there's clear motivation there. But I think the context of this is really important, and it's slightly in the space that we were discussing earlier around the national grid. It needs to be an asset that supports small enterprises, the whole economy, private users, individuals, everything. So if we leave the entire thing in the hands of major corporations who wish to reduce their risks or create the opportunities by privatizing their energy source, that will probably be a very important solution to them, but it's not the whole solution for the entire grid. And we need to be quite careful. There needs to be a frame for this. And it goes, your solar story. So what if we get to the point where there is solar energy available to 1% of major corporations only and nothing else, because there's never been a wider policy around it? That's not the full potential that we could realise with solar contributions to the grid, but it could be the catalyst. And that's where I think this comes in. If PPAs allow companies to become active participants in decarbonising the grid by releasing capital for investment that wasn't available elsewhere, by investing in the technologies, and by creating more generation that then is available, then it's a great thing and it will drive us forward. But we need a policy frame that sits around that to make the most of it. If it just operates as free enterprise for pure profit, we'll limit. It still will be good. We'll still increase our renewable energy generation, but we need to have that wider context, and we need to allow this to create the policy mandate to act on the heels of the leaders.
So we would just recreate the inequality gap, but not amongst individuals, but amongst companies and economies. So we have 1.5 minutes. I'm going to ask each of you on the panel just if there's one thing that a company can do to control its own destiny, what should it do? So Sue, I'll go with you first. Just go straight down.
Yeah. CDP's mantra that we live by is transparency drives insight, which drives action. So start monitoring, measuring, and disclosing your energy usage, and that will help underpin all of that cascade of decisions and investments that will in the end put you on the right side of the carbon detransition curve.
Thank you, Sue. And Norman?
Yeah, look, I think just take the first step, right? Yeah, stop trying to wriggle on the hook of all this pressure and just get on with it. It can be quite fun,
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, that sustainability is core and a mean to be profitable rather than a side project. So it becomes core to the strategy of the company. And second is to be capable to be able to measure it in real time, measure performance, so that you can continuously improve accordingly.
And I'm just going to emphasize, because we meant to talk about it and we didn't, it can be profitable, the transition.
Absolutely.
And it is something that repeated reports have ever actually emphasized. There's a business opportunity in decarbonizing. So, sorry, go on then, Harold.
Yeah, I think power, you can move fast with the source of your power. And then there's so many other things where you can move less fast because you have to think more. It's more bespoke for you. But where did you get your power from? Is it renewable? Can you get it via PPA or via some other way of accessing renewables? It's a quick win. You can move fast. The market is so ready, and you don't have unique needs. You just need power like everyone else. So move quickly on that one, and also save money on it. That's a great benefit.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank my panel for a really fascinating discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.